Arrogant billionaire's son hits a pregnant waitress, then the truth about her husband freezes him. What if one moment of cruelty could shatter everything you thought you knew about yourself? The rain drummed against the windows of Maple Street Diner as 34-year-old Lucy wiped down tables with the careful movements of someone carrying precious cargo. Her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, 6 months along now, and she smiled, thinking about the little one who would arrive in spring. The diner was nearly empty except for old Frank reading his newspaper, and a young man in an expensive suit who'd been staring at his phone for the past hour, his untouched coffee growing cold. Lucy had seen his type before: wealthy, impatient, the kind who treated service workers like furniture. But she'd learned long ago that kindness costs nothing, even when it isn't returned. As she approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee, she had no idea that the next few minutes would change both their lives forever. "Where are you watching from tonight?" 42-year-old Bradley Thornton III tapped his manicured fingers against the worn Formica table, his irritation growing with each passing minute. The Thornton name opened doors across the city. His father's real estate empire had built half the skyline. But here in this rundown diner, nobody seemed to care about his importance. He'd only stopped in because his Tesla needed charging at the station next door, and now he was trapped in what felt like a time warp from the 1970s. Lucy moved between tables with practiced grace despite her pregnancy, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the same uniform as every other waitress, a pale blue dress with a white apron. But there was something different about her. Maybe it was the way she genuinely smiled at old Frank when she refilled his coffee, or how she'd quietly paid for a homeless man's soup earlier when she thought no one was looking. "Excuse me," Bradley called out, his voice sharp with entitlement. "I ordered a fresh cup 20 minutes ago. This is completely unacceptable." Lucy hurried over, coffee pot in hand. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get you that right away." Her voice was soft, apologetic, even though she'd offered him fresh coffee 3 times and he'd waved her away each time. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Bradley's voice rose loud enough that Frank looked up from his paper. "I could buy this entire dump with my lunch money. The least you could do is provide decent service." Lucy's cheeks flushed, but she kept her composure. "Again, I apologize. Would you like me to bring you something else? Maybe some fresh pie? It's on the house." Bradley's laugh was harsh and cutting. "Pie? From this place? I wouldn't feed it to my dog." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "You people are all the same. No ambition, no class, just content to waste your lives in dead-end jobs." The words hit Lucy like physical blows. She thought about her husband serving overseas, about the nursing degree she'd put on hold when he was deployed, about how she worked double shifts to save money for the baby. But she said nothing, just stood there clutching the coffee pot with trembling hands. "I'm leaving," Bradley announced, throwing a crumpled $5 bill on the table. Not enough to cover his coffee, and certainly no tip. "And I'll be sure to leave a review about the pathetic service here." As he stormed toward the door, Lucy tried to step aside, but her pregnant belly made her movements slower than usual. Bradley, furious and not paying attention, crashed directly into her. The impact sent Lucy stumbling backward, her hand instinctively protecting her stomach as she fought to regain her balance. The coffee pot slipped from her grasp, shattering against the floor in a splash of dark liquid and broken glass. For a moment, the diner was completely silent except for the rain still beating against the windows. "Now look what you've done," Bradley shouted, as if Lucy had deliberately thrown herself into his path. "These are Italian leather shoes. Do you have any idea what they cost?" Lucy sat heavily in the nearest chair, her breathing shallow as she pressed both hands to her belly. The baby had been active all morning, but now everything was still and quiet. Too quiet. Frank had already jumped up from his seat, his weathered hands reaching for his phone to call for help. "Please," Lucy whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I think something's wrong." But Bradley was too caught up in his own outrage to notice her distress. "Wrong? What's wrong is that I'm stuck in this hellhole with people who can't even walk in a straight line. My father will hear about this. We'll shut this place down. Son. Frank's voice cut through Bradley's tirade like a blade. The girl's hurt. Look at her. For the first time, Bradley actually looked, really looked, at Lucy. Her face had gone pale, her hands were shaking, and there was something in her eyes that made his stomach clench with an unfamiliar feeling. Fear. Not fear of him or his threats, but fear for something infinitely more precious. I need to get to the hospital, Lucy said quietly, her voice steady despite her tears. Something's wrong with the baby. The words hit Bradley like a slap. Baby. She was pregnant. He'd been so absorbed in his own anger that he hadn't even noticed. As Lucy struggled to stand, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. The lock screen showed a photo that made Bradley's blood freeze in his veins. It was Lucy smiling beside a man in military dress uniform, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. But it wasn't just any uniform. It was the uniform of the Army's Special Forces, and the man wearing it had kind eyes and the same gentle smile as Lucy. Pinned to his chest were ribbons that Bradley recognized from news reports, medals for valor, for service in the most dangerous places on Earth. My husband's overseas, Lucy said softly, not noticing Bradley's shocked expression as she scrolled through her contacts. He's supposed to call tonight. I don't know how to tell him about this. Frank had already called 911, and the sound of sirens was growing closer. Lucy stood carefully, one hand still pressed to her stomach, the other clutching her phone. She looked at Bradley with eyes that held no anger, just a deep sadness that cut through him more effectively than any accusation could have. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. I need to call my husband, she said simply. He's going to be so worried. As she walked slowly toward the door to meet the ambulance, Bradley stood frozen in place. The photograph on her phone had shown him something he'd never expected to see, the face of a hero. And he'd just knocked down that hero's pregnant wife, possibly harming his unborn child. The weight of his actions crashed down on him like a physical force, and for the first time in his privileged life, Bradley Thornton III understood what real shame felt like. The ambulance lights painted the diner's windows in flashing red and blue as paramedics carefully helped Lucy onto a stretcher. Bradley watched. The crumpled $5 bill still sat on the table where he'd thrown it, and now it seemed to mock him with its inadequacy. Frank approached slowly, his eyes hard with decades of wisdom earned through real struggle. That girl works 3 jobs to support herself while her husband serves our country, he said quietly. Lost her first baby 2 years ago, right before he deployed. This pregnancy means everything to them. The words hit Bradley like physical blows. He thought about his own life, the trust fund he'd never earned, the executive position at his father's company that required no real work, the endless string of parties and expensive toys that filled his days. When had he last done anything that mattered? When had he last faced real hardship or made a genuine sacrifice for someone else? She never complains, Frank continued, his voice heavy with respect. Works double shifts when other girls call in sick, always has a kind word for everyone, even the difficult customers. He paused meaningfully. Especially the difficult customers. Through the window, Bradley could see Lucy on the phone, her free hand still pressed protectively to her belly. Even from this distance, he could see her shoulders shaking with tears. She was trying to explain to her husband, thousands of miles away and unable to help, that their miracle might be slipping away because of one man's selfishness and rage. Her husband, what's his story? Bradley found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Frank's expression softened slightly. Captain James Mitchell. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Saved a school full of children when insurgents attacked. The army wanted to give him a medal, but he said he was just doing his job. Frank shook his head. Real hero, that one. Quiet about it, too. Never talks about what he's seen or done. Just focuses on serving others. Bradley's stomach churned as he imagined calling his own father with news like this. Harrison Thornton too would probably send lawyers before flowers, more concerned about liability than humanity. But this soldier, this man who'd risked his life for strangers, would drop everything to be here if he could. And instead, he was stuck on the other side of the world, helpless to protect the woman he loved from people like Bradley. The paramedic was explaining something to Lucy, his voice too quiet to hear through the glass, but Bradley could see her relief. Her hand moved to her stomach and she managed a small smile through her tears. The baby was okay, at least for now, but she still needed to get to the hospital for observation. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. As the ambulance pulled away, Bradley remained frozen by the window. His reflection stared back at him, expensive haircut, designer clothes, a face that had never known real worry or consequence. For the first time in his life, he was looking at a stranger, and he didn't like what he saw. Bradley's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd never thought he'd use. His father's personal assistant, Patricia, answered on the first ring with her usual crisp efficiency. "Patricia, I need you to find out everything about a woman named Lucy Mitchell. Her husband is Captain James Mitchell, Army Special Forces. She was just taken to the hospital, probably Presbyterian or General, and I need to make sure she gets the best care possible." There was a pause. "Mr. Thornton, is this related to a legal matter? Should I contact our attorneys?" "No," Bradley said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "This is personal. I need you to call the hospital administrators directly. Tell them that all of Mrs. Mitchell's medical expenses are to be sent to me personally, not the company. Everything, the emergency visit, any treatments, follow-up care. And if they need to transfer her to a specialist, cost is not an issue." "Sir, I don't understand. Who is this woman?" Bradley closed his eyes, seeing the photograph of Lucy and her husband, the love and trust in their faces. "Someone I hurt. And I'm going to make it right." After hanging up, Bradley drove through the rain to Presbyterian Hospital, his Tesla's leather seats suddenly feeling obscene in their luxury. In the emergency waiting room, he sat among families facing real crises, a grandmother clutching her purse while her grandson got stitches, a construction worker with a bandaged hand, people for whom a hospital bill could mean choosing between medicine and rent. When Lucy emerged from the examination room 2 hours later, she looked exhausted but relieved. The baby was fine, the doctor had said, but she needed rest and reduced stress. She was gathering her discharge papers when she noticed Bradley sitting in the corner, his head in his hands. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly, not unkindly but with genuine confusion. Bradley stood slowly, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. "How do you apologize for nearly destroying someone's life? How do you explain that their grace had shown you the poverty of your own soul?" "I called my father's assistant," he said finally. "She's handling all your medical expenses. And I've arranged for you to see Dr. Rachel Winters. She's the best maternal-fetal specialist in the state. Tomorrow at 10, if that works for you." Lucy stared at him. "I can't afford. It's taken care of. All of it." Bradley's voice cracked slightly. "I saw the photo of your husband. I know what he's sacrificing for people like me, and I repaid that sacrifice by hurting his wife. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure you and your baby get the care you deserve." Tears filled Lucy's eyes, but this time they weren't from pain or fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "James always says there's good in everyone. I guess he was right." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As they walked toward the hospital exit together, Bradley felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, he'd done something that mattered, something that helped instead of hurt. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of becoming the man he should have been all along. 3 weeks later, Bradley found himself standing outside Maple Street Diner again, but this time his hands weren't empty. He carried an envelope thick with something more valuable than money, a handwritten letter that had traveled halfway around the world. Inside, Lucy was back at work, moving a little more slowly but with the same gentle grace. Dr. Winters had confirmed that both mother and baby were perfectly healthy, and the pregnancy was progressing beautifully. When Lucy saw Bradley enter, she smiled, a real smile, warm and forgiving. "I have something for you," Bradley said, extending the envelope. "It's from your husband." Lucy's eyes widened as she recognized the military postmark. Inside, Bradley unfolded his letter with trembling hands. The words were simple but carried the weight of true honor. Mr. Thornton, Lucy told me what happened and how you've taken care of her since then. I've seen good men make mistakes and bad men refuse to change. Thank you for choosing to be better. When I come home, I'd like to shake your hand. Respectfully, Captain James Mitchell. He's coming home, Lucy said softly, her hand moving to her now prominent belly. Next month. He'll be here when the baby's born. Bradley nodded, unable to speak for a moment. In the past 3 weeks, he'd done more than just pay medical bills. He'd quietly arranged for the diner's health insurance to improve, created a scholarship fund for children of deployed military families, and started volunteering at a veteran support center. None of it had his name on it. He'd learned that real generosity didn't need recognition. His father had been shocked when Bradley declined his usual place at the country club's charity gala, choosing instead to serve dinner at a homeless shelter. "What's gotten into you?" Harrison had demanded. But Bradley simply smiled and said he'd found something worth his time. "There's something else," Bradley said finally. "I've been thinking about what your husband does, serving others, protecting people who can't protect themselves. I want to do that too, in my own way. I'm starting a foundation to support military families, and I'd like to name it after your baby." Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. "Bradley, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me be part of something good," he replied. "For the first time in my life, I want to matter for the right reasons." The diner's other customers had grown familiar with Bradley's visits. He'd learned everyone's names, always left generous tips, and treated each person with the respect he'd never shown before. Mrs. Peterson, who cleaned offices at night to support her grandchildren, had been surprised when anonymous donations covered her grandson's school supplies. She never knew it was Bradley. Old Frank, who'd been quietly listening from his usual booth, stood and walked over. "Son," he said to Bradley, "I've been coming to this place for 30 years. Seen a lot of people pass through those doors. But I ain't never seen someone change the way you have." He extended his weathered hand. "Takes a real man to admit when he's wrong and work to make it right." As Bradley shook Frank's hand, he felt the last of his old arrogance fade away. Outside, the spring rain was gentle and warm, washing the world clean. Lucy was humming softly as she worked, her wedding ring catching the light as she arranged fresh flowers on each table. In a few weeks, her hero would come home to meet his child, and Bradley would be there to welcome them both. Not as the entitled billionaire's son he'd been, but as the friend he'd learned to become. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of redemption and the power of second chances.